We welcome, on behalf of Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, the Executive Committee of the Chandigarh Lalit Kala Akademi, and the people of Chandigarh, we welcome you all. I'll begin from this side. Dr. Navina Karode, Mr. Atul Dodiya, Dr. Tasneem Mehta, Anju Dodiya, Bhavna Sadanand, Menon, Alka Pande. I'm calling her Alka Pande knowingly because she is a friend. I can take this liberty with her. I'm not calling her Dr. Alka Pande. Dr. Tasneem Mehta, she is the director of the Dawbhaji Art Museum in Mumbai, and which was earlier called Victoria and Albert Museum. And she's completely changed. And she's changed the way museums are managed, museums are presented, and how museums can be made, more interactive in a way. There's a more kind of interaction with the public, which you'll see when she gives her presentation.
I'm going to add to the chorus of applause for Diwan Mehta and say that it's really been quite an amazing experience being here these last 3 days. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my work with this wonderful gathering. In Mumbai, it's difficult for us to collect such a large gathering for lectures. We're constantly trying to do that at the museum. And I'm very impressed with the fact that all of you, such a large gathering, have come here on a Sunday morning, and you have been coming regularly over the last 2 days. I also want to say that it was such a pleasure to come to this city, which was such a surprise, because you have this wonderful museum next door. You have the College of Art. Yesterday I went to the Khalsa Museum, which was also quite an amazing experience. And it's a beautifully laid out city, the Corbusier Museum and all the other elements that you have that feed into a kind of process, thinking, which you can see in all of you in your enthusiasm for art. So I'm going to share with you my work over the last 10 years, which has basically been, of course, involved with INTAC, but also about restoring this museum, which was in a completely derelict condition, and we raised the funds for it. We put together a proposal for the government, and amazingly, the government was not basically interested in museums and said to us, no, this is not our job, it's the local government. And they said, this is not our job, and whatever you can do with it, you try. And if you can raise the money, it would be wonderful, and then we will let you do the project. And so we set out 10 years ago when it was very difficult because nobody really was interested in culture 10 years ago. Nobody was interested in conservation 10 years ago. And we embarked on this process of trying to convince people, and it was it took a lot of time. And we really didn't know what we were getting into at that time. We started with the restoration, which I'm going to show you, the film. So we started with the restoration, and then slowly the goalposts kept shifting. I must say that the fact that we were able to get private funding acted as a tremendous catalyst for the project, because if we had been stuck to putting in proposals for budgets and justifying changes and why we wanted to do something more, and if a joint secretary or an undersecretary in the ministry needed to be explained and needed to be convinced, I'm not sure that we would have got to where we have, which is what I'm going to share with you and which is what you're going to see. So I know my friends, Sadanand doesn't believe in private investment in culture, but I feel there is a paradigm to look at, and I feel, of course, any kind of investment of that kind does need regulation, but it's very important to create these. It's a collaboration with people, with the citizens, bringing in the community into the project. So it's not just private money, but as long as the private money is able to give you the freedom and allow you to believes in your vision, which is what has happened with this project. They never interfered at any point. They've never told us what to do, and so you will see how that worked, and that's why we were able to achieve what we have in this in the museum. Now, the other plea that I really want to make, and which will be the second half of the presentation, which is where you will see the interventions that we have made, the contemporary interventions in the museum. The other plea is that, you know, we, and I of course am deeply involved with contemporary art, as you know. The plea is that we shouldn't wait to regenerate the contemporary arts, whether it is the crafts or whether it is contemporary art, by building institutions that can showcase them. I really believe we have fantastic museums. We have amazing cultural spaces, and we need to invite the artists into these cultural spaces. So we don't need to wait till we've built NGMAs in all our major cities in India where we can then show contemporary art. Otherwise, we are just allowing the galleries and then the international museums to take over the agency. And I think it's very important that we change that paradigm that we have, which is a very 19th century way of looking at the world. It's a grid that has been bequeathed to us by the 19th century, that this is classical, this is fine art, this is craft, they're all very separate. It justified a logic of supremacy and dominance at that particular time. It is no longer valid. So it's so important to bring the artist back into the space that was always meant for the artist. And you know, Atul yesterday lamented the fact that our museums are institutions that have become so moribund. And in fact, what I'm going to try and show you, that there is a way of reinvigorating them, where I believe the community needs to take a much more active role and demand, and maybe through private funding, if that is the way to go forward. Of course, it should be regulated. Of course, it should be controlled. But that's possibly a way where we can create this dialogue, and this gridlock that we have of classical, fine arts, contemporary, all separated, should be broken down. And we invite the contemporary artists to respond to our museum collections, to come in and engage with the collections. Atul told me that in Philadelphia, where he's just had a retrospective exhibition, one of his works was placed in a temple that they have, a complete temple, I believe, right, Atul? With, and in a 12th century temple, and one of his works was placed alongside that 12th century masterpieces. So that's the kind of engagement that I think is very necessary to reinvigorate the contemporary area, and also to not allow Western curators and Western institutions to take over the agency. Because what is happening is the Tate and the MoMA, I'm on the International Council of the MoMA, they are all intent on making collections of Indian contemporary art. And they have the funds, they've set it aside, and they're very aggressive about it. And what will happen is that we will soon, 10 years down the road, if we want to see substantial collections of Atul and Anju and Vivan, we may have to go to New York and Paris and London and other places to find them, because we would not have purchased these works of art ourselves. So I want you to stop and think about that, and think that, you know, certainly here in Chandigarh, I think you've got a wonderful proactive Lalit Kala. You have a great museum, and I was very happy to see that you do include contemporary art in it, that you need to now go the next step and start buying and being more active and engaging the artists more directly. Okay, I'm going to show you this quick 10-minute film on the restoration. And what do? I just, right?
60 years after independence, India is poised to take its place among the world's greatest economies. In a unique case of public and private partnership in conservation and culture is the visionary partnership between the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai, Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, INTAC, and the Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation has transformed the once derelict Dr. Bhavdaji Lad Museum into one of the finest museums of the city. A magical jewel in the heart of India's commercial capital. The new restored Dr. Bhavna Lad Museum is dedicated to the dynamic entrepreneurial spirit of Mumbai and its people.
मुंबई में जो जितने कुछ अच्छी स्थानीय है या चीज़ें हैं, उसमें ये तो मुझे लगता है कि सबसे बड़ा ये संग्रहालय है और इसी के लिए कई देशों से नागरिक ये संग्रहालय देखने के लिए आएंगे, ऐसी मुझे उम्मीद है।
Restoration project of Dr. Bhavna Lad Museum, which we are all seeing today, is the culmination of the efforts of Municipal Corporation of Mumbai along with Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation and the foremost NGO in heritage conservation intact for gifting a restored and excellent museum to the people of Mumbai. And I'm very happy that it has succeeded and it can be a role model for other similar projects, cultural projects in the country.
Neeraj and Meenal Bajaj were convinced that the museum could play an important role in transforming the cultural environment of Mumbai and extended generous support to the project through the Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation. Hidden in the leafy environs of Veer Mata Jijabai Udyan, neglected and forlorn, caked with dust and flaking paint, lay India's second oldest museum, forgotten. Colors and details in its interior had faded and disappeared. The Victorian iron pillars had separated from the walls. Beautiful carved teakwood doors had been painted over. And the delicate stucco and stencil work damaged. The electric cables were conspicuous all over the building.
So I'll just quickly take you through it. Well, you've got a pretty good sense of what sort of condition the museum was like. Not all museums in the country are in such bad shape, but quite a few of them, especially the state government museums, are sometimes in a really unbelievable state, where the chaprasi is also looking after the collection, he is taking the ticket money, etc. We actually had a survey done of Maharashtra museums and discovered that that was the case with most of the museums. So just very quickly to show it to you, it's a grand Palladian structure, the oldest, built in 1872, but the collection was constituted in 1855. It was a response to the Great Exhibition, which Prince Albert, who was consort of Queen Victoria, and that's why his statue is at the center, in the central vestibule of the museum. He was the one who generated the idea, who came up with the idea of the Great Exhibition, which of course was also a question of showcasing Britain's might. And so what you see is objects there which were the 19th century, some of the finest craftsmanship of the 19th century, which was showcased to showcase the arts of India, but it was very much contemporary. It was not about the classical. It was to show innovations and things that were happening in the art world, in artistic practice at that time. And so that, in a sense, was really my cue for wanting to bring the artist, to engage with the artist. There were many other reasons as well. The curator of the museum and the principal of the School of Art for over 100 years were the same person. That tended to be the case with 19th century museums. It was a paradigm that was followed by the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. And again, it was very much this new museum movement that happened in the 19th century that moved away from the curiosity collections that were the museums of the from the 12th century really to the 18th century, which were showing the spoils of war and then all sorts of curiosities that were collected by victors. And this was also showcasing contemporary culture. And it was the oldest museum. And, but it also, it's a very interesting point, and it was my sort of little political riposte to that historic moment, that, you know, the artist, Indian artist, as probably many of you know, you're students of art here. In the 19th century, the British rejected Indian art completely, Indian fine arts completely. And they built a very elaborate logic, you know, spearheaded by John Ruskin, justifying the fact that, of course, and by many other theologians of the time, justifying the fact that Indian art was, you know, the sculpture was terrible, it was disproportionate, the painting was flat, it didn't understand perspectives because, of course, they were looking at the Renaissance and the classical models. And so they completely rejected, and they said Indians were incapable of fine art. And you find people like George Birdwood, who was a major figure of the 19th century in Indian art in India. At the time, he was commissioner for several of the great exhibitions. He was also the curator of the museum and was the defining ideologue of the museum when it started. He completely rejected Indian fine art. So for me, in a sense, given that history, a connection with the JJ, given that you know, it was supposed to be a contemporary museum showcasing what was happening at that time in the country, the fact that the artist, the most important figure, had been excluded was, you know, my riposte to that was to bring the artist, the contemporary artist, and put the artist back and center stage, as you will see in our programming. So here, just a little bit of what you've already seen, the before and after of the museum. It was in a completely derelict condition. This is some of the collection which the video actually explained, the industrial arts collection, and then it became the students of the JJ School of Art made these beautiful dioramas and models, which were a form of documentation. They were really an extension, a sculptural extension of company school painting, which documented life in the 19th century, very much again coming out of that scientific taxonomic way of decoding, of understanding cultures, but also of controlling culture. So here you have one of the cases, and this is not the way they were. The museum was completely recurated, retrofitted, all the cases were retrofitted, new lighting, LED lighting, we imported it, we did glass inside, but we wanted very much to keep that 19th century ambience, that ambient feeling of as if you've walked back into time. So it's that very interesting juxtaposition when you ask contemporary artists to come and make an intervention in the space. It was deliberately creating that kind of visual juxtaposition also. So here you see this was a prize-winning case. They were not in this case, they were dumped somewhere else, of communities of Mumbai, which won a prize at the Paris Great Exhibition, and we resurrected them and restored them, and they're in this case, which is the central piece in the upstairs gallery. And these are just some of the collection of rare books, of very fine collection of rare books on the city, very fine collection of glass negatives. And so we've invited now artists to come in, and there is a curatorial frame which we created, which we called engaging traditions. So we invite artists whose practice reflects on traditions, involves tradition, is looking at various aspects. And the wonderful thing about this museum is that it's so encyclopedic that almost anything can be extracted from it. But you know, we've looked specifically first at artists who were from the JJ School of Art, and then extended the lens to artists whose practice particularly engage with craft traditions, with processes, because all of those points were very important, or with particular traditions that have a relevance for Mumbai. So we've had Sudarshan Shetty was the first artist, and I'm going to show you his work, then Jitish Kalat, both of whom were at the JJ School of Art, Sheba Chhachhi, which was in a sense, you know, her work deals with miniature painting And I was very moved by some of it, and a lot of it with gender issues. And so we invited her, and then Ellen Talur, whose wonderful tongue-in-cheek exhibition won the Skoda Award this year, the Skoda Prize this year. So we'll just go on. So we'll look at Sudarshan Shetty, and his work questions the premises of making art and the arbitrary values ascribed to art. The artist questions the very existence of the museum as an institution and the aura of authority it exudes. You'll see that in some of the pieces. His objects take their form from historic processes and organic beginnings, but in skillfully playing with their forms, Shetty subverts the original intentions. As an artist who has been deeply engaged with the life of the city, his work in the exhibition has a profound exploration of its vulnerabilities, its dark interstices, and its lost histories. So here you see Talur. Now, he was having this conversation with the statue of Albert, which was wonderful. So he created this pedestal, which was very process-oriented, very raw, very rough. And then he made this gilded statue of himself. And if you know Sudarshan, Sudarshan is always just dressed in jeans. So this was he was dressed here in this smart suit and all gilded. And it's just obviously a comment on what we do with art and artists. And then there was this little box, money box on the side, which you can see on the right, at the bottom of the podium. And as you filled money into it, the statue moved. So first when it was down, and as the more money you filled in it, the statue would come up. So it was also, of course, a comment on the art world. And this is a car, a crashed car. Of course, when you look at it here, and unfortunately we can't show it in the round. We do have video, but we've not been able to show that. It takes on, because the material changes and the materiality of objects. He's commenting on that, and of course he was commenting on how things change the moment you put them into museum. This was a crashed car, and I went with him to Baroda, and it looked, when he was doing it, when he was working on it, and it looked, I mean, you just, you sort of recoiled from it because it's just terrible, this thing. And then it was made in wood, and it just changed. It became the sensuous object that could have been part of an archaeological find, and then you put it into a museum. So he put it in, and he put it on a rotating display like you see at airports. You have, prize-winning cars. If you buy a lottery, you get a prize, and you see the car on display rotating. So he put it up in that sort of way. And it was a sort of, obviously, a tongue-in-cheek comment on what happens to objects when they go into museums, how they take on a different aura. And Talur also talks about that sort of process as well. And here, of course, he also, Sudarshan's work has a lot of existential, different kinds of meaning to it. And if any of you are interested, we have a catalog, and you can let me know, and we can mail you the catalog on this exhibition. And you can also, by the way, go online and see all of these exhibitions with more extensive curatorial comments on it. So this was a chair, which again, found object, which he found in the bazaar, in Chor Bazaar, and then he transformed it. He used, of course, blood has been a constant metaphor in his work. And here you see there's the word there is scar, and there is blood dripping from it. So it's a comment on what has happened to the whole the whole history of craft, etc., in India as well. And here you see this is a chabutra, and it's fallen down. So again, looking at traditions again, and how I'm simplifying everything very, very. It's very simplistic, some of these interpretations, but in 2 minutes to just give you a quick insight, because there are many layers of meanings to this. But I was very intrigued as to why he had pixelated the blood. And he said, because today we don't understand. It's, we don't experience blood. We see so much violence on the screen, and we've become inured to that violence. We've become inured to the sight of blood. We don't really respond. So this material object, which takes on this inanimate object, which takes on a life and which is bleeding, So then again, the rocking horse with the skeletal rocking horse, which was a wonderful piece, and the feather, which is you have the feather dusters, which you clean cases, which you see a lot of museum people there clean the cases with feather dusters. So he took one of the feathers and he put that, and it rotates and it's cleaning itself. So this is a kind of engagement that happened, and there were many other objects through the museum, which we've not been able to show you, which actually commented on some of the on the collections as well. Now this is Jitish Kalat. Jitish's work also draws its raw material from the city, sifting its dreams and articulating its challenges. And in this case, he's appropriated the architecture of the museum, and he spent 2 years talking with me. We went through in great depth. He looked. A lot of my PhD work was on the museum as well, and the School of Art, and we talked about the whole history of the museum, and then his work and the colonial history of the city. And of course, he's been interested in that for some time. So what you see here is he even had put up the scaffolding. And if any of you saw the Skoda Prize, which he was in, not this year, but the year before, he had actually put up the scaffolding that he did for this project. Then he gave it a different sort of meaning, put it up in the Lalit Kala. Here he's in a sense, he's appropriating Albert, and he's appropriating the museum, and he's also commenting, of course, on the history of the city, which is constantly in a process of being made and remade, and commenting on the remaking of the museum as well, and annexation, which is a wonderful work about which takes the stove, which is a ubiquitous object in India, and he grafted onto it the idea of survival, because the stove basically is a survival, an object of survival. You cook your food on it. And onto this, he took the gargoyles from the Victoria Terminus, another very grand, opulent building in Mumbai, which is a World Heritage site. And he took the gargoyles and he made it into, I'm not sure if there's a detail of that. Yeah, there's a detail of annexation here. And you see, these are almost copies of the gargoyle, but he has created this jungle of animals eating animals, a kind of raw survival of the fittest, which in a sense is what the city represents. And we put this object among, as you can see, of how we've incorporated it into the fabric of the display. So it's next to these objects which were pottery objects, which we felt it should sit with. It's right there, and as you walk in. Then again, he made an intervention into the museum where this looks like it's almost like it was always there. It was a clock, but you do a second take, and here he's of course distorted that sense of time. Again, a comment on what the museum represents and plays with time. Here we have he did this work. He's been working with these figurines. When he came 3 years earlier, he'd been very moved by the dioramas and the idea of what these dioramas represent and how they showcase the life of the city in the 19th century in a very anodyne, beautiful, a very sort of colonial interpretation, very idealized pastoral interpretation of what life in India was like, because that suited a particular way of looking at India or presenting India during the arts and crafts movement of the 19th century. So he works with that, it completely subverts it and turns it around. And Mumbai has now become famous for its riots. So he created these riot scenes. So he was going to place it on the floor, and I said, no, it won't look right on the floor. I think we should put it in a case. So there was a big production emptying these cases because we have a shortage of storage space, etc. But we did. We emptied some of our major cases. And several artists and several people at the opening walked past the case because they thought it was just one more of the dioramas. But this is the kind of work that we've been doing with integrating the artwork. And then here, Jitish, we have this wonderful case of military of military uniforms and armed, then a case of army, of soldiers. And he very skillfully drew this bullet hole. And people would come and look at it and say, oh my God, when did this glass shatter? Did you have some kind of terror attack? What is this? And so, but you know, it's you don't know whether it's from inside out, outside in. He was playing with all these ideas. And then another one where he's looked at the history of the museum, and there was a conflict between the curator and the board. You know, so we invite artists to work with the archive and to use it as a resource. This is Sheba Chhachhi, very quickly. I think many of you have seen her work. So I'll move through this quickly in the interest of time. She did this wonderful work on labor and called Mistri Ke Haath. Sorry, just speaking too much. So here it is a comment on all those wonderful artists whose works are now in a museum case, but they're anonymous. We don't know who they are. So, and she had all these anonymous people, craftsmen, photographs of them at the foot of Albert. And here you see some of her text-based, the lens-based work with these installations where she works with miniatures and of course plays around with the original texts and original stories and rewrites them. And then this is Neelkant, which you must have seen when she must have shown you this work, which is an amazing work, which was the central installation in the museum. And this one also evoking the water diviner, which is the loss of our archives and the loss of libraries. And then she used the water systems of Mumbai in her installation, light box installation. And Talur, which I think many of you must be familiar with, because this exhibition won the Skoda Prize. And so here he was looking at the colonial history of museum. And of course it was very tongue-in-cheek. So this particular one, angotherapy machine, where he constructed this pankha, and he invited, it was very playful, and people loved the idea of sitting there and playing with the objects and engaging. In each one of his objects, he invites the viewer to participate and interact with the work. So just very quickly go through. And this of course was the Elephanta elephant, which is outside, which is part of our museum collection now, and it sits in the garden. And the British were trying to take it to London. And of course the crane broke and it smashed into several pieces, and they brought the pieces back, and the curator Bird would put it all together. So he played on that history. And at the back, what you can see on the video screen is a live rendition of the Elephanta elephant. So it's like a child's puzzle where you're looking at the real thing, or you're looking at a picture of it and then you try to fix it back again. People again were very, very intrigued by this work. So this is Talur. Another one, Hatha Yoga, where we have a beautiful case, or a case of beautiful yogis, very finely done. And he loved that case. And that also, by the way, is reflected in his Kochi work, where there are yogis sitting all on the roof. And he said to me when I went there, he said, this is like walking into one of your dioramas. So he'd sort of taken the idea of the diorama and expanded it. Here you see Eraser Pro, which is Gandhi, and what we have done with Gandhi today. And I have to tell you that I was very nervous about showing this work because I didn't know what kind of reaction there would be. We have a very conservative government running the municipal corporation, but nothing happened, fortunately. And this is this exhibition has just come down. This is Ranjini Shetar. And again, we invited this artist because her work looks at the earliest interests of the museum, which were very scientific, interest in botany, interest in minerals and plants. It's very scientific, in fact, it was very encyclopedic. So both objects and botanical things were collected. And the British Museum and several other museums across the world that started in the 19th century started in that way. A lot of curiosity, natural history curiosity objects as well. So she refers to the sort of natural history or nature, and works with processes. She works with very traditional processes, and very contemporary material. So she worked, for example, with coffee wood in this. It's an organic material, and then she sprayed it with automobile paint. And what it looks like is like a giant sort of skeleton or some kind of object, and some kind of animal, some giant plant or some giant animal, and and she made it specifically for this central vestibule here. And just show you some of the details. It was very beautiful. And then, of course, you must be familiar with these works, but they took on a different reading. So even those artists might bring in earlier works, they take on a different reading once contextualized in the museum. This is a scent of sound, and here heliotropes. So you see that we again to enable us to show contemporary art, we've actually had to efface some of the architecture, but the room gets a sort of cathedral-like aura because it's very high ceiling, and I think most of the artists have been very happy to work in that space. So I'm going to go through it very quickly. This was a gift. The Museum of Modern Art commissioned her to work on a book on the monsoon, and then they were so thrilled with the exhibition, they gifted us a copy of the book. And just to show you that it is possible for museums to do, to take on a role of both bringing in art from bringing in artists, doing international exhibitions, working with collections. We do not need to necessarily just be stuck in one particular mode. So we have a partnership with the V&A. We've had exhibitions. So we have a focus on design. We have a focus on contemporary art. We focus on art and architecture of the city, the history of the city, because these are all collections that we have. So everything that we do, the base is from the collection and inspired by the collection. So this is exhibition from the V&A of Olympic posters on design. And this is just to show you what the space was like. This is the space which we have now, where we have effaced. Very beautiful space, but we had no choice because it was very difficult to show contemporary art here. And then we've had international collaborations with INIVA, with the Dresden Museum. I'm going to go through all this very quickly. Sudhir Patwardhan, just to give you a sense of the kind of work we've been doing. We had recently a very important collaboration with the Guggenheim Museum in New York, where we presented the Urban Lab with them, which was doing 3 programs a day looking at future cities and how cities should evolve. And this is a computer rendition of it. And this is the actual lab, and this is the place. Now, this is an extension which we just created 3 months ago. We've opened this new extension of the museum, which is a plaza to the back of the museum. And so we've had lots of people, and this is just to give you an idea. With music, we do a huge education program, 300 kids a day coming into the museum, seminars. We started a course on modern and contemporary art. So this is our library. We've just made an acquisition as well, which we're very happy about, which very few museums in India are making. So we were delighted that we were able to do that. In fact, I don't think any museum in India has made an acquisition as far as I know. I was on part of the committee that was writing the acquisition policy for the government. That's why I know that. Excepting the private museums. And we get about 1,000 people a day, and about 3,000 on weekends. Peak season during the Guggenheim Lab, we had about 5,000 to 6,000 people a day. Our capacity is about 5,000. But because of the back area, we were able to get in a little bit more. And so you see between this sort of wide variety of people who come in. And it's very nice to be able to, they're very intrigued with looking at the contemporary art, and they want to know, they ask questions. We have a comment book for people. They stand in line and they want to write comments, and it's wonderful to read some of them. So this is it, and then now the government has agreed to allow us to build a new building at the rear. This is a new, smaller gallery that we opened in one of the cottages. This used to be a cottage where the artists used to work on this, artists from the School of Art used to work on the dioramas that were in the museum. And we've converted it into this contemporary art space now. And that's Asim Waqif's work. So you see Anita Dubé, that was the last exhibition up there. And this is Shaurya, this is an extension to that. And this is the plan for the new building, which is 25,000 square foot of built up area and about another 50,000 area, which is non-buildable space, which would be the frontage to the museum. And that's, the government has agreed to allow us to do an international architectural competition. They've actually allocated funds in the budget this year for the architectural competition, which is a big thing. And hopefully in the next 3 to 4 years, we'll have a building of about 60 to 75,000 square foot of new space. And here, they were so thrilled with the idea, the mayor went and announced it in the papers before I could say anything. So it was already in the papers. Thank you.